This topic will discuss the Spirent TestCenter Automation API installation and environment. The Spirent TestCenter Automation API installation and environment topic will cover key elements of installing the API as well as configuring the environment to allow you to configure and run scripts effectively. To review, the Spirent TestCenter Automation API allows you to create scripts using TCL to configure and control the Spirent TestCenter. You had generic TCL on the left side, and once you install and have access to the API, you now can perform specific commands for Spirent TestCenter, such as STC perform, STC create. The Spirent TestCenter Automation API supports
Windows, Unix, and Linux platforms.
For Windows-based systems, there is the Spirent TestCenter application.exe file, which, when executed, will launch the Spirent TestCenter application install shield wizard. Several screens will be displayed. You will have to select a couple of responses, such as I accept the terms of the license agreement. If you want to, you can accept the default location of the file structure, and the software is installed by itself. Upon successful installation of the software, you will now have access to the Spirent TestCenter GUI as well as the Automation API. However, before you can start running scripts, there's a couple of things that you're going to have to do. There are really three methods of gaining access to the Spirent TestCenter Automation API from within TCL. You can create a folder within the TCL Lib folder, and then within that folder, specify a link to the package index.tcl file. This is not recommended, and we will talk about package index.tcl in the next couple of slides. You can copy the entire TestCenter application folder to the TCL Lib folder. That also is not recommended. It's not really recommended to have multiple versions of the API within your file system, unless you're doing it for a reason. For example, maybe in future releases, you want to keep an old release and a new release. In that case, you can have two versions of the software. However, that's really not recommended. Now, the best way to create access to Tickle to the API is to create a TCL Lib path environment variable statement from the Windows control panel to include access to the Spirent TestCenter application folder. And we'll take a look at this method in detail. The top two, we will not, since they're really not recommended methods. However, you could use them if you so choose. Before we discuss the TCL Lib path environment variable setup, I wanted to talk about a couple of key Automation API TCL scripts, namely package index.tcl and Spirent TestCenter.tcl. The package index.tcl file to call in or set up the API environment. We'll talk about the package command on the next slide. However, notice the package index file, and one of the things that it will do is it points to the Spirent TestCenter.tcl file. There are two methods to load the Spirent TestCenter Automation API within TCL, using the package require command or the source command. With Spirent TestCenter, you can use either one. You'll see here that we launched TCL, basically starting the shell, TCL sh, and then we perform the package require Spirent TestCenter command. Now you'll notice that we received an error message. It's not really an error message, but it says can't find package. Now in this case, we performed the put s and then $autopath, and it will display what your autopath directory is within TCL. Now you'll notice here that we have nothing pointing to the Spirent TestCenter applications directory, and we need to access that, or we need to put that in the TCL Lib path statement so it has access to that. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is you're going to want to launch the control panel from Windows, Start, Settings, Control Panel, and then System. And let's take a look on the next slide, and we'll see what we have to set up. From the System Properties screen, we are going to select Advanced, the Advanced tab, and then we are going to select the Environment Variables button as highlighted on the left side of the screen. From the Environment Variables section, we are going to select a new system variable as highlighted. that will launch the new system variable screen. At that point, we will type in TCL lib path as displayed, and then we are going to have to put the variable value in there. Now we have to point to the Spirent TestCenter applications folder as what's shown on the top of the screen. You'd select OK, and then you'd select OK on the system properties, and at that time, now we can take a look at what's going to happen. If you had the TCL shell open, then you will have to exit the TCL shell as well as close the DOS command prompt. You want to refresh the TCL interpreter with the new values that you've changed within the TCL lib path environment variable. In the top slide, you'll see the correct TCL lib path result. You'll see that we started TCL and then we performed the putS $auto_path command. And at that point, you'll notice that the path to the Spirent TestCenter application is prepended to the existing path statements. You'll notice C program files, Spirent communications, Spirent TestCenter application. Now there is a link from TCL to the Spirent TestCenter application directory or folder, and that contains all of the Spirent TestCenter Automation API DLLs libraries. Now here is the result of the package require Spirent TestCenter command after we've made the changes to the TCL lib path environment variable. Now when we perform the package require, you will notice that it's going to return the version of the API. And then you'll see the %, which is the TCL command prompt. And at that point, you know you have access to the Spirent TestCenter Automation API. Now at this time, if you wanted to start to develop a script or type in specific Spirent TestCenter Automation API commands, such as STC perform, then you would have access to them at this point. Now you can also use the source command as well to provide access to the Automation API or calling in the Automation API. Now in the top example, you'll notice that we're off the root directory. We're in TCL. We performed a source Spirent TestCenter command, and it responds with a could not read file Spirent TestCenter, no such file or directory, because we needed to do one or two things. One, in the bottom example, we've changed directories, and we're now in the Spirent TestCenter application directory. And then when we source that in, you'll notice that it actually took effect. So now at this point, you could create a script using Spirent TestCenter automation commands, objects, functions, and you would be able to perform it successfully. Or in your script, and the first line, instead of just sourcing in Spirent TestCenter.tcl, you would have to supply the path to where that file is resident. So in other words, you just have to do the source and then the C:// program files, etc., all the way to Spirent TestCenter.tcl. Once again, if there's any spaces in those folders, you're going to have to use the double quotes at the beginning of the C and at the ending of the last element of that string.
Thank you. This completes this video presentation.